As mentioned, my name is JT Starzecki. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at 5E Advanced Materials. Very excited to be here this morning to talk about what we feel is the next best thing in the battery material sector. I bet if I went around the room prior to this discussion, I'm sure I could ask everybody here in the audience what is boron and what is it used in, and I'm guessing about 95% of everybody would shrug their shoulders. So one of the things I really hope to be able to leave here today is to give the audience sort of a fundamental understanding of what boron is. Most importantly, what boron is used in, and actually there's 12 or 14 applications for boron just in this room as it is. And then also to talk through sort of what the investment proposition is of what we're building at 5E Advanced Materials. Now, my chief legal counsel will be happy, so we've got that out of the way. But one of the things I'm really very interested in trying to leave behind, so that when I finish this presentation, everybody in the audience has a good idea of what the key investment highlights actually are for 5E Advanced Materials. So, boron itself is a very rare anomaly that exists geologically, and I'll get into sort of why there's very few boron deposits that exist globally. But what we have is we've got a large and rare asset sitting in a very mining friendly community in Southern California that has access to all key infrastructure already in place. So access to rail, interstate highway, we've got permits for water, electricity, and gas pipeline access all exist on the project right now. And this project itself was a proof of concept project back in the mid 90s. The reason I bring that up is it's important to know that that a previous company was able to actually inject in, because we're using in situ leaching, was able to inject in, extract the colemanite deposit, and produce boric acid. So I'll use the terms boric acid and boron interchangeably as it comes to this particular speech. We do tend to talk in terms of boric acid. So you've got borates, which are the raw material. Boron is the general term, and boric acid is the most highly utilized form of boron. So strategic location, we're very catalyst rich in what we have as a deposit. So the ability for us to take the boric acid and create boron advanced materials is actually part of our business strategy and something that we're executing on today. We also have a co-product, lithium carbonate, and I know that that is the darling of the EV sector right now, followed very closely by rare earths. But in all of those components, specifically in the permanent magnets that go into the electric vehicles, that go into the wind turbines, none of that works without boron as part of that battery technology. From a company perspective, just a quick snapshot, the resource size is 327 million tons. We've got a boric acid grade of 8.22%. We have lithium carbonate essentially at 332 parts per million, but we're using a crystallization process as part of our processing. So we're able to actually get that lithium carbonate parts per million up over 1,000 parts per million, which puts us in the battery grade and technical grade categories. So that's a really nice co-product stream for us. We are dual listed on the NASDAQ and the ASX. Our origins come from Australia and early investors come out of Australia, but we redomiciled into the US in 2022, listed on the NASDAQ, and have been dual listed since. So let's talk about what the boron opportunities look like. And there will be a lot of previous presentations, if anybody has gone back to listen, where I talk about megatrends. And what we are absolutely playing into are these three identified and emerging global megatrends. First is obviously the decarbonization sector, right? So everything we can do to aid in the energy transformation is always going to have a favorable outlook in the particular markets. So on the next slide, I'll talk about, and I'll give you some illustrations on exactly how we fit into that particular space. Not many people know that the second most consumed micronutrient on the planet is boron. So if you're a farmer anywhere in the world and you're applying either direct application fertilizers, foliar applications, or NPK blends, you are incorporating boron in some capacity. Zinc and boron are the two most widely consumed outside of the macros. Why that's important is it gives more credence to what we're producing. you'll see in a few slides that we've identified, or banks have identified, a growing supply gap, where even just in the green tech space, all of the additional production that potentially could come online will be gobbled up, and there's an emerging supply gap that's already upon us. We are a US based company, which means we are playing into the whole onshoring of global supply, bringing a strategic material. We are not listed as a strategic mineral yet, but we are classified as a strategic material. We also have a critical infrastructure designation by the US government. So that is very much us playing into the onshoring of critical materials. And when we talk sort of about why the barrier to entry, it is a high barrier to entry, is there's very few of these assets that exist globally. And the reason is very simple. To have a boron deposit, you need to have three things. You need to have volcanic activity, you need to have an evaporate sea basin, and you need to have geological faults, which essentially trap that liquid magma, and the sea basins, when they dry up and fill up and dry up and fill up, compress that layer, and that's ultimately what we go down to extrapolate. So we are in the Mojave Desert, just south of the Pisgah crater, which is essentially the geologic formation that has created the colemanite ore body in which we are mining. I particularly love this slide when it comes to our presentation, and I'm going to step out here a little bit. But this is a graphic representation today of what utilization of boric acid looks like. So when people think boron, they're going to maybe at some point draw a conclusion to the old laundry detergent borax. And while boron was used in that and used in low-end fiberglass technologies, it's also been being used in all types of different applications for the electric vehicles. So whether that's acoustic insulation, whether that is the fiberglass panels on the outside, the body panels, or the ferroboron steel that goes into the chassis, which creates a lighter, more impact-resistant chassis, boron has an application. So 10 to 20 kgs of boron is used in every electric vehicle being produced today. It doesn't stop there. It then goes into wind turbines, and specifically it goes into the construct of the wind turbine blades, right? Boron is the second hardest material on the periodic table. Therefore, when it's used to construct the blades become more environmental resistant. But most importantly, it's the magnets that go into those permanent, or to those motors. I love that graphic because I think of it in one way, which is in the front half of that electric motor and that magnet is rare earths, and the back side is boron. So it's two parts rare earth, one part boron. There's no substitute for boron. So the mousetrap as we know it today has to have boron. Boron is a very tightly constrained market, as I'll show you in the next slide. So we think that the opportunity in that space, and then along with solar, so the borosilica glass is a specific glass used in everything from the screens on your smartphones to the glass on solar panels. So there's a lot of different applications in the green and clean tech space. We're starting to see both the demand growth grow in said applications that you saw on the previous slide. So this was a study put out by one of the leading banks out of Australia. And what they essentially did was take a breakdown, and the gray areas represent sort of the non-GDP style growth applications. So the older stuff, the stuff that is low end and isn't going to move the needle. The green sections represent everything that is happening in what we call future-facing technologies. So the ability to put boron into things like wind, solar, and EVs, very, very important. What that has led to is the graph that you see over on the other side, which is this supply and demand imbalance. So at the end of 22, every ounce that was produced, or every ton that was produced, was spoken for. There's no large scale visible projects coming online in the near future outside of us at 5E Advanced Materials. The market itself is a duopoly, so it's controlled by Rio Tinto's US Borax operation in Boron, California, and Etimaden, the state-owned entity out of Turkey. That group controls about 65% of the world's production and sits on 72% of the world's reserve. So when we think about it from a political risk perspective, we've got a lot of technology, both green technology and even defense applications, that rely on a product coming out of an area that has some issues with their economy. It's a net importer of energy. Best way to look at pricing, because it's an opaque market for boric acid. There are websites out there that you can get consistent pricing information. A lot of that comes out of China. China is the largest producer of boron advanced materials on the planet. So the UK, the US, Australia, a lot of the defense armor, so the tank armor, the Kevlar vests, a lot of that is raw product brought in from either Turkey or from the US, brought into China, created, and then sold back. So it's difficult to get very clear pictures. We used to have a slide up there where we compared lithium, boric acid, and rare earths. You had a very high differential between the three. What's most important is that up until a few years ago, boric acid prices followed the CPI index or the CP index. What we saw in 21 is this diversion where boric acid prices are now 3 times what they were pretty much historically. That makes a project like ours much more economically viable. It's a lot of the reason why some of these other earlier study projects have not been advanced. So when we look at the overall portfolio of what is happening in the market, you have to sort of break it down and go back to those 3 things I mentioned earlier that you have to have by way of a boron to get a boron deposit. So you have all of the rumored stuff in Serbia that is essentially owned by Rio Tinto. None of those have advanced even into the drill stage. It's all desktop study. It's all analysis. You then have people whose groups have moved into actually putting drill rigs in the ground, have defined a resource and put out either a DFS or a BFS. Anybody that follows the space will have heard of Ioneer. Ioneer is really a lithium story, but they do have boric acid as part of their project. Unfortunately for them, they're tied up in U.S. Regulation and permitting issues. So that becomes a challenge. We are very hopeful that that project comes online because the gap that I showed earlier has started to increase such that even if all of these projects came online, it's still not going to make up for the fact that Rio Tinto comes offline in 2042 and we have 900,000 tons of boric acid equivalent that goes away. We are all the way through the permitting stage and we are actually almost complete with construction. We have built a phase 1 facility that is finishing the commissioning right now. We will be the first new boric acid producer when that plant goes live here by the end of the first half of the year. And then, of course, you've got the highly constrained Etimad and Rio Tinto producer. Essentially what we're saying is this is the best way to get direct access to the boric acid market. I've talked about the project. So let me just skip with the 2 minutes I've got left to what foundations we have in place. So the asset quality is fantastic. We have 327 million tons of product. Right now, our estimates give us about a 45-year mine life at peak production of 500,000 tons. Should we scale into that, the mine will last quite a bit longer. What you're seeing is the infrastructure that we've got in the ground. So if you go onto the site today, we've got a fully functioning operating plant that is going through commissioning. We will complete some injection control testing, and then we will be moving to production here in the coming weeks and months. From a capital markets perspective, we're continuing to work to drive more liquidity into our stock. We have about a $250 million market cap on the NASDAQ. That gives us about a $375 million market cap on the ASX. And we continue to add more and more institutional investors every month. Our commercial dynamics are fantastic. We have the ability to talk commercial offtake agreements both in boric acid and in lithium carbonate. So we've got a lot of blue chip organizations that we would expect to be able to make public here in the coming months. So what's left? Production and value engineering. So as we go into production of phase 1, we will immediately begin the detailed engineering for phase 2. That essentially is we're building it in modules, and the modules are constrained by the crystallization technique or the crystallizers that we buy. So we're going to be coming out here in the next few weeks with an updated SK1300 and an updated PFS, if you will. So we'll be able to talk CapEx, OpEx, and ramp up schedule on this modular approach that we were taking to development. You'll also see future upcoming catalysts around our commercial partnerships, both from a customer perspective and a research perspective. And then, of course, we wouldn't be a strategic materials company if we weren't going all out to chase all of the money that exists in the DoD and the DOE. And on top of that, we are eligible for money from the USDA, so the Department of Food and Agriculture.